Feeling a bit sad that nobody recognises Crazy Town and or Crazy Bones and or Crazy Taxi anymore? These are crazy times we live in, so fire up those emulators, apply the deep heat to your knees and join me, Jimmy, on a journey through PS2 gems so hidden that are like those insane dudes who go spelunking, but instead of dying horribly under the ground, you simply get to play under the skin instead. Capcom are doing some pretty good things right about now, just as long as you don't ask them to optimize an open world. How absurd. But apart from Kunitsugami, they aren't getting quite as weird as they used to, and that's a pity. I do wish they'd make more weekend games like this one. Under the Skin is a brilliantly PS2 OS PS2 game that came about from them going, you know what, let's make a game about doing pranks as an alien, and also we'll put some of it in Raccoon City. Yeah, there's a Resident Evil level here, and yes, cel-shaded Jill is still cool as hell. In Under the Skin, you play as Cosme, an alien who's able to shapeshift to play pranks on the unsuspecting human public. You can use all sorts of Home Alone-esque weapons and gear to do just that, with Under the Skin ultimately being a kind of stealth game if it was sponsored by the Right to Censor entrance theme. I won't play that song, don't worry. Think of Under the Skin as almost like a mix of Destroy All Humans, alien silliness, and the experimentation of Hitman to achieve the cleanest routes and highest scores, and you have an idea of the daft fun on offer here. It's not the tidiest game ever, and the camera is kind of a bastard, but in small doses this is a cel-shaded bit of goofiness with some of the most playful sandboxes across the whole of the PS2. Also, yes, the name does have a familiar ring to it. Alright, so this is quite possibly the most revered, but also most forgotten PS2 game I've ever come across. An 82 on Metacritic is of course nothing to sneeze at, but genuinely I'd never even heard of Ring of Red until just this year, thanks to some of you guys in the comments. Thanks. Granted, an early PS2 era strategy game probably isn't the sexiest sell in the world, but a Konami published alternate history tale that splits action between turn-based tactics and real-time combat with mechs. Hello, where have we all been? Essentially, Ring of Red is set in a post-World War II world where no nuclear bomb was dropped, but Japan is instead split into North and South after an Allied invasion. What that means for you is a pretty sick diesel punk strategy game where you can command units across a grid to capture cities and also blow stuff up as a mech. If that wasn't ambitious enough, Ring of Red also features day and night cycles, weather systems that include natural disasters, and your battles are even affected by what's going on in your environment. It all sounds like a lot, and the combat UI can be a bit messy, but Ring of Red is much more approachable than you might first think too. It's also a lot cheaper than you might think too, but don't worry about atoning if you want to play this through other means either, matey. Basically, any RPG that came anywhere near the juggernaut vortex that was Final Fantasy X was gonna have a hard time. And then when that RPG also asks you to possess people to help them with their lives with zero blitzball in sight, it's little wonder that this one got overlooked in 2001. It doesn't help that it never came to Europe either. Developed by Cattle Call, who would go on to make the also kinda but not totally forgotten Ark the Lad Twilight of the Spirits, Tsugunai Atonement pits you as Rise, a mercenary who pisses the gods off so much that they separate his spirit from his body. To atone, you must help out at the local fishing village by basically becoming neutral good Beetlejuice. It's a unique twist with plenty of quests to take up and varied characters to help, but Tsugunai does have some decent turn-based combat to boot. The single character party is a unique choice, but the emphasis on guarding and the gentle difficulty curve mean you don't get immediately ganked while on your own. It's not Final Fantasy or Persona, but it is just a bit different. That's pretty cool. With an evolving village to explore, plenty of interesting characters to possess, and music from Chrono Trigger GOAT Yasunori Mitsuda to enjoy, Tsugunai Atonement does look a bit rudimentary today, but run towards your nearest online emporium of shared goods and find out for yourself what it's all about. Run Like Hell is like a D-tier running meme on this channel. It's not on the level of F-Zero, nothing is, but it's a weird-ass action horror game I do enjoy bringing up. I gotta be honest here though, it's not what you would call a very good video game, but it is pretty interesting. You play as Nicholas Connor, who's voiced by sci-fi legend Lance Henriksen. He boards a space station where everything is fine and enjoys a nice glass of relaxing space milk. Not really, there's loads of aliens on board and everyone is getting eaten in half every 5 minutes, so you have to take your infinite ammo basically and get blasting, apart from times when you can't and have to do all that running. Lance Henriksen isn't the only celeb here, with Clancy Brown, Michael Ironside and even Brad Dourif being among the cast, but the biggest appearance has got to be, Balls Garana? America, you are a country. You could also buy a special edition of the game that came with bottles of the drink. Incredible! It even has a trailer for the collaboration. If it seems like Red Light Hell suffered from a lack of a cohesive artistic direction, that's probably because it did. The game kinda rolled out of the door after 5 years of development hell, with most of the work being crammed into 10 months. That might explain why this one-time survival horror game basically has infinite ammo and really weird Crash Bandicoot meets RE4 chase sequences with QTEs. So hey, at least it was ahead of the curve in that way? I am bagging on Run Like Hell a bit here, but trust me, I do have a very soft spot for it, and it's what you'd call a very rough diamond. From the Breaking Benjamin music video to the product placement to basically all of the attention to detail going toward female NPC belly buttons, this is such an incredible time capsule that's totally worth playing. Some games come out just a little bit too early. Trespasser, remember Trespasser, is one of my favourite examples. You know that ropey Jurassic Park game with some crazy physics? We did a little documentary on that. Go watch it. It's in the above place. While it was kind of popular in 2002, something like Rygar the Legendary Adventure really could have exploded with a bit more familiarity with the PS2 tech, and also maybe if the protagonist was bald. You play as Rygar, who at the behest of the gods is on a journey of repute to save a princess from some titans. Rather than using the power of diplomacy, Rygar instead utilizes pretty fun character action to throw his disc armor shield around to batter worms an awful lot, and also periodically help him take on epic cinematic boss battles. Seemingly inspired by Devil May Cry itself, this is, well, was for the time, a modernized entry in the Rygar series that some reviewers even preferred to Devil May Cry. Not sure I'd go that far, but the legendary adventure is all about combos, platforming, fixed cameras, some light puzzles, and gods being very cheeky monkeys. If it sounds and looks like Rygar is some kind of proto-God of War, you aren't miles off. So much of God of War's earliest DNA can be found here. I wouldn't be surprised, if someone at Santa Monica was a big-time fan of this game, as even the glowing circle button of interaction in God of War seems to have originated here. It's kind of funny that the throwable shield mechanics here then appeared in the God of War reboot too. Rygar the Legendary Adventure is a tad rough around the edges these days, and its incredibly lazy Wii remake is even rougher, but Rygar does offer plenty of fun, hefty combat and a hugely ambitious blockbuster scale. It's a piece of gaming history that's sadly just kinda been forgotten. Unlike some other horror movie franchises, how have we never had a Final Destination game? There's actually been quite a few Evil Dead games over the years, and while they've never exactly been sterling, oh my, they almost always manage to capture the kitsch B-movie charm and comedy of the source material. Evil Dead Regeneration for the PS2 in particular nails it the best, even though the game's story does disregard the events of Army of Darkness for a whole new adventure instead. The action itself kicks off after the events of Evil Dead 2 with Ash locked inside the Sunny Meadows Asylum. If that's not bad enough for everyone's favourite one-armed hero, the asylum's doctor and certified Mr. Fancy Pants, Reinhard, is using the Necronomicon to take over the world. Why must they always use these tools of evil for evil? Playing as Ash, you'll carve and shoot your way through hordes of Deadites alongside a half-Deadite ally named Sam, chasing Reinhard down in an attempt to stop his fiendish plans. Sam, by the way, is voiced by Ted Raimi, brother of Sam Raimi. Regeneration is admittedly not the most polished game ever made, and Sam can be exceedingly annoying, but if you're still looking for a bit more Bruce Campbell in your life, that is a PS2 as hell PS2 game, Evil Dead Regeneration should be making its way into your playlist. People are still longing for a proper ninja stealth game along the lines of Tenchu these days, though you should really check out Aragami by the way. But Yakito Online grabbed our attention with their comment, when you want a better and non-linear Tenchu game with more mechanics, Shinobido is the game for you. Developed by Acquire, who previously created the Tenchu game, so there you go, there's a bit of synergy. Shinobido Way of the Ninja bears a lot of similarities to their earlier work, only more open-ended in how players choose to approach the game. You play as an amnesiac ninja who wakes up on the riverside to a mysterious message. Apparently he's one of the last surviving members of the Asuka clan, and in order to find answers and retrieve his memories and soul, he'll need to ally himself with one of the 3 prominent warlords vying for control of Utakata. Yes, it's a bit like mercenaries. You're free to choose missions from one of the 3 main warlords, with those missions falling into one of over a dozen different objectives. While there's some story missions and moments that are scripted, your path to becoming a master ninja is yours to walk, whether you choose to approach the story like one ruler's rabid attack dog or perform missions unseen for every faction so none of them learn of your betrayal. It's tough and unforgiving, but for stealth fans it might be a shocks to the system. While bringing up the word shox in the year 2025 might make people think of Nike trainers, Shox the game is proof that the PS2 had a huge love affair with rally games. Regrettably, Shox flew under the radar a bit, but that's probably not much of a surprise when its competition was the likes of V-Rally 3 and the Colin McRae Rally series, but that doesn't mean Shox should be left resigned to history. Hell, it's part of the EA Sports big label, and as card-carrying members of the SSX fan club, it's our duty to show love to a fellow big boy. Big. Also known as Shox Rally Reinvented, players took one of over 20 licensed rally cars from manufacturers like Subaru, Ford, Mitsubishi, BMW and more, and would take them through a World Championship season of 30 races. That isn't how Rally has been reinvented here, as the key gimmick in Shox's arcade-style gameplay is the Shox Zones, which would basically serve as mini time trials players would complete within races. The better your performance during a Shox Zone, the better your cash prize, with gold in all 3 zones on a track triggering a Shox wave that offers even more money. Admittedly, if me saying it 1 million times hasn't already done it, playing this game will probably make you sick of seeing the word Shox, but the rally gameplay on offer here is wonderful in a very unpretentious way, and I wouldn't alter it for anything. Anything. While I'm not sure his photo ID is up to snuff, Mr. McLovin1995 offered a solid suggestion in the comments. Here's one that's never talked about, and I swear my buddy and I are the only ones who know of its existence: Alter Echo. Developed by Outrage Games, a studio that would be acquired in 2002 and then subsequently shuttered by THQ within a year, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Alter Echo is an action platformer that possibly has the most 2003 cover art ever seen. Look at that. Look how beautiful that is. That would absolutely be on my pencil case. Set in the far-flung future, humanity has evolved to where certain people have developed psychic abilities. Referred to as shapers, they use a material called plast to create whatever they like. But to cut a long story short, a powerful shaper named Parvo has created a better version named Echoplast, but he's gone mad and shot your shit down. Shot your ship. Not shit. Luckily, Echoplast has gained sentience, giving you a new suit to kick Parvo's butt. As a 3D action platformer, you're given 3 different forms to approach combat with, from sword to gun to weird frog stealth suit, and while the environments get a bit samey after a while, the combat will keep you hooked. It's very, very, very PS2, and we wish we could summon more games like it. Volition were, rest in peace, known for a great many different games or franchises down the years. Some know them for Saints Row, others for their work on The Punisher, well, no one can forget the Red Faction series. Whippers one and all. I even liked Armageddon a good bit. There you go, that's my deepest truth. However, less people might know of their fantasy RPG work, with the Summoner games offering some excellent, underrated RPG thrills on a console that's quite frankly filled to the brim with top-tier RPGs. The first Summoner game is still good, serving as one of the first games to launch on the PS2 in North America, but the sequel is a much more well-rounded game. Playing as Maya, who is a reborn goddess who can transform into several different creatures at will, Summoner 2 sees Maya form an adventuring band to try and heal the Tree of Elah, fighting monsters, gods and creatures alike in the process. While the first game had a hybrid system of turn-based and real-time combat, Summoner 2's more action-oriented approach is much more engaging, and the story encourages a lot more choice, especially when it comes to the development of the overall kingdom. Depending on where you donate your money and the choices you make in combat, some elements will change in the later course of the game. A lot of people know Summoner 1, of course, from the PlayStation 2's early days, but I don't think a lot of people really even know that Summoner 2 exists, and that's a shame because it's a total trip that's well worth taking.
Those crazy wheels have got a spicy move.
Shout out to Anime Bros AMV, who reminded us of a grave error we'd love to correct. Total Overdose is not a game you hear about these days. Would love to see it in the next one. We did speak about Chili Con Carnage, if that counts for anything though. The most unabashed ripoff of several established formulas. Total Overdose is a janky mess of a game, but its silly charm, fun gameplay, and excellent soundtrack make it a true PS2 highlight for a number of people. Set on the border between the US and Mexico, Total Overdose, as the name would imply, is about the DEA's war on drugs, with Ramiro and his brother Tommy investigating the gangs of Mexico in the hopes of finding a lead about their dad's mysterious disappearance. Instead of piecing together clues and interviewing suspects, Ramiro's method of investigation is a bit more Frank Reynolds and involves dual-wielding pistols and slow-motion dodging his way through hordes of goons while some Mexican hip-hop or rock plays in the background. It's awesome, and remember kids, bullet time is always fun time. The core gameplay is clearly inspired by Max Payne, while Total Overdose also has one of the more pointless open worlds to explore in gaming, because GTA did that, so why not Total Overdose do that also, Total Overdose is just perfect, switch your brain off and press buttons until all things die, gaming fun, and the world could do with more of it. We're not rolling the dice on an HD port of this one though, like, ever. Yes, licensed and tie-in games usually suck, etc, but an unwritten rule is that anime adaptations can often be exempt. Sure, you get some that are a bit naff, but for the most part they're at least usually kind of fun. One such adaptation for the PS2 was DICE, DNA Integrated Cybernetic Enterprises, and though I'm not going to say that it's a masterpiece, there are some interesting gameplay ideas on offer here that it's baffling they weren't stolen wholesale by Transformers. It also puts an acronym within an acronym, and you've got to appreciate that really. Based on the Bandai anime of the same name that was developed specifically for North American audiences, the game allows you to pick from one of 11 characters from the show, each with their own Dino Breaker mount. The crux is that Dino Breakers can morph between their regular dinosaur form, which is used in beat-em-up style combat, and a vehicle form, which is used for various racing missions or to travel across levels as quickly as possible. Kinda clever. The core gameplay is fairly simple, and it didn't really review that well, and again, it's not the best game in the world, but the series was aimed at kids after all, making it a perfect anime game for the tykes to enjoy. If your child still plays the PS2 and isn't cranking 90s on Fortnite, do they still crank 90s in there? It used to be with it, and then they changed what it was. Sneaky Skunk, any relation to this guy, isn't the only one in the comments sticking up for Steambot Chronicles, but they definitely put their best foot forward when they said, Steambot Chronicles, aka Bumpy Trot, is a fun pseudo-open world action RPG for the PS2. If this video gets a sequel, then that is my 2 cents on hidden gems for that great system. Well, we'll be taking those 2 cents now. Please, we need them. We do not have any sponsors. No raid Shadow Legends, not even a raid really, not even a scuffle, not even a kerfuffle. As Mr. Skunk alluded to, Steambot Chronicles was known as a Bumpy Trot in Japan, which sounds like some forgotten horse wrestling anime, and I love it. Players control Vanilla R. Beans, who awakens on a beach with amnesia after an apparent shipwreck. Before long, you're joined by Coriander, the lead vocalist of the Garland Globetrotters, no relation to Harlem, and the pair of you find a run-down trotmobile that's basically a walking car, and you embark on a world-spanning adventure. The Tropmobiles are used for exploration and combat, with players able to customize their Tropmobile to fit one of several different archetypes. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of Steambot Chronicles, though, is the personality and choices on offer. At the start of the game, you complete a personality test that determines how people within the game react to you, and there's even a moment partway through the game that allows you to decide on a hero or villain playthrough. Replayability, cool aesthetic, unique gameplay, Steambot Chronicles has it all. It might be a sin to recommend a PS2 hidden gem that's available on PC and Switch, but in fairness, the port of Soul Nomad and the World Eaters is just that, and also we can sin a bit if we want. We aren't on Weight Watchers or the Puritan family out of the witch. Remember, sin, sometimes, it's fine, it's alright. Yeah. Developed by Genre Legends NIS, players control Rahe, someone who's been tasked with defeating the magical weapons known as the World Eaters. Their former master, the Demon Gig, is imprisoned inside Rahe, and the dastardly devil keeps trying to tempt Rahe towards the path of evil. Players can create squads of characters from one of 25 different classes, and the squad formations, known as rooms, provides various bonuses and benefits that make these strategy aspects really sing. Easy to pick up, fun to play with a great story, Soul Nomad and the World Eaters deserves more attention, especially for its evil playthrough. As for how to play it, that port is basically just the PS2 game re-released on modern platforms. At least if you played it via some other arcane means, you could boost the resolution and force a widescreen aspect ratio. Get the spellbook out. Regardless of how you choose to play Soul Nomad and the World Eaters though, many can agree that this is a strategy RPG that might leave you in tears. Capcom were positively prolific when it came to developing and publishing games for the PS2, but one game that flew under the radar was Crimson Tears. Senu Munu is here to put things right. It's a Capcom published game that's basically Power Stone plus beat 'em up. Responsive and fluid gameplay, some light fan service, atrocious voice acting. The full package. As someone, who didn't know how to say 3 for most of my adult life, you had me at atrocious voice acting, brother. Set in the far-flung future of 2049, which is basically next week, players can choose from either Tokyo, KD, or Amber as playable characters, each with their own unique stats and strengths, before descending into the dungeons of Neo Tokyo to try and find loot and kill the boss at the end. If that sounds kinda like a roguelike to you, you won't be too far off, as the dungeon changes during each run, with different layouts and enemy placements to watch out for. If that's not enough, you also need to make sure you don't melt down, as using weapons too much will put you in a berserk state that will begin to drain your health. It's all pretty neat stuff. If you like beat-em-ups that offer plenty of weapons and responsive controls, and you're a fan of cel-shaded games on the PS2, Crimson Tears should be at the top of the list of games to play. Unexpected bonus fact for you, or bonus fact? I don't know if that works. The developers of this, Dream Factory, also made The Bouncer. So, I need to start this list with an apology. That's because the selections shown in our sadly forgotten PS2 games video weren't quite what verbal Esfet, was looking for. Fortunately for us, he left us with an idea that's about as under the radar as it gets. One I highly recommend is the brilliant Tear Ring Saga, Berwick Saga. Maybe the best game of this genre ever to be produced, and it's not that well known. If, like us, you hadn't heard of Tear Ring Saga before, well that's because it's a Japan-exclusive duology of strategy RPGs that come from the creator of Fire Emblem, Shutsu Kaga, after he left Nintendo's Intelligent Systems back in 1999. Tear Ring Saga would end up causing a legal battle between Nintendo and the game's developer and publisher, Tirnanog and Enterbrain respectively. There's loads to go through with this one, but basically Enterbrain were forced to pay Nintendo millions of yen in damages, but the Japanese courts ultimately found that Tear Ring Saga had every right to be sold, a ruling that allowed spiritual successors to legacy RPGs to become commonplace in the years since. So you know that AU Den? That's basically just Suikoden. That's because of Tear Ring Saga. All of this, and we haven't even gotten to talking about the second game specifically, Tear Ring Saga Berwick Saga, which was released on the PS2 in 2005. Crucially gang, Berwick Saga contains some key differences from its inspirations and source material, with the main difference being that combat takes place on a hexagonal grid instead of a square one. Those 2 extra sides on every space gives combat and strategy that extra bit of dynamism that keeps the action fresh throughout the lengthy campaign. Another innovation is that a good chunk of the recruitable party members are actually mercenaries, requiring you to fulfill certain conditions in order for them to join full time. If you're interested in giving this a go yourself, unfortunately, it's a really laborious process involving. No, it's really easy. It's quite easy to emulate, actually. Yeah. Anyway, next one. Koei might have had one of the biggest libraries when it came to PS2 games, though if we're being honest, most of them were just re-releases or revisions of the same game. You're such scamps for that, Koei. Extreme Legends and Empires are still just Dynasty Warriors or Samurai Warriors games, guys, just scamps. However, for Anime Bros AMV, one Koei game deserves more love than it receives. For me, it has to be Kessen 3. I play that game on PS2 to this day.
To this day!
Much like Dynasty and Samurai Warriors, Kessen dives into the romanticised history of Asia to create a game about smacking hordes of dudes with a massive weapon. While Kessen 2 adopted that underground hit Romance of the Three Kingdoms, have you heard of it? Kessen 1 and Kessen 3 are all about samurai and feudal Japan. The first game was a mostly historical retelling of the war between clans, but Kessen 3 is a fantasized take on the life of historical figure Oda Nobunaga. The game even paints Nobunaga as more of a virtuous hero compared to Onimusha, where he was a big demon villain. I still don't trust him. As for Kessen 3 itself, you control one of several warriors as they lead their troops into battle. Unlike the Warriors games though, you have an army following you at all times, and you need to keep their formation in line when attacking other units, activating skills and abilities that can turn the tide in your favour. While that might sound like you're a bit too divorced from the action, all playable characters can trigger a rampage, which zooms the action in and allows you to just control the leader. Here you have 60 seconds to cause as much damage as possible, earning experience, cash and the ability to restore lost troops in the process. It can be a lot at once, but as we mentioned, you don't stand alone, and it's not too complex to enjoy it either. We're not here to tell you that Ghost in the Shell is some kind of hidden gem franchise that only the cool kids know. It's not Mob Psycho 100, which seems pretty popular, but still, doesn't give it more flowers. What some people do forget about, though, is Ghost in the Shell's tie-in games, including Standalone Complex, based on the anime of the same name. Jesus is King of Kings, stated as much in our comments. It's not very forgotten, but Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex is an amazing game that deserves more popularity. Right you are, fella, but we're sorry, Triple H is the one true King of Kings. Set between the events of the first anime series and its sequel, Second Gig, the game follows Section 9 members Major Motoko Kusanagi and Second in Command Bato as they investigate a conspiracy involving the Japanese government. So yeah, granted, that doesn't narrow it down in the slightest in the world of Ghost in the Shell, but this conspiracy has something to do with Micro Machine Rice, so at least that's a bit different. Players switch control of both Motoko and Bato during the course of the game, with both characters playing differently to each other to keep the action plenty fresh. While Bato's levels are a bit more straightforward, with his superior firepower able to crater anyone unfortunate enough to be on the same city block as him, Motoko's levels are much more interesting. The player is able to use her agility to maneuver quite freely around the level, jumping up walls to reach new heights. Imagine Sam Fisher taught Mario for a bit and you're getting a sense of the verticality we're talking about here. Throw in the full voiceover cast from the original anime series and you've got something that both fans and action game lovers can enjoy. But looks like that Triple H fella has some new competition. Jonathan Eves 376 or Jonathan Eves 376? Questions laid down the challenge for us in the comments section, and who were we to not nibble on that bait just a little bit? A little ribbit. Ribbit King, I've never heard anyone on any platform mention this game. Well, you're about to now. It's happened just then. You are right now. It's happened. Yes. A sequel to Kero Kero King, which was released exclusively on the PS1 back in 2000, Ribbit King is a weird one. Essentially, you play as a lad by the name of Scooter who's competing in a sport called Frolf, a portmanteau of frog and golf. You know, like foot golf? That kind of thing. You're playing golf with frogs, only replace the golf clubs with hammers and catapults. Earning low strokes on a hole gives you points towards your total, and each hole has a host of weird interactables that give players points too, whether it's floating bubbles filled with points or flies that the frogs can catch. Look, am I going to sit here and say that Ribbit King is the best PS2 game ever made and the fact that it never won Game of the Year is a disgrace? No, I know it's not polished and it's a bit too weird to gain any real success. Also, it's not Psyops, but that doesn't mean there isn't plenty of fun to be had here. The game's career mode allows you to unlock plenty of new characters for use in multiplayer, along with different frogs that each have their own unique properties and strength. What a sentence. What a sentence. If you want to see a game that spotlights the PS2's library at its most imaginative, and something that would basically be unheard of in today's gaming landscape unless Astrobot fancies a round of Frolf, Ribbit King is of a certain caliber. Commenter Goatbone wasn't exactly forthcoming when he made his recommendation to us on the actually underrated PS2 Hidden Gems video, Twin Caliber. Thank me later. Well, Goatbone mate, I've seen you comment this a couple of times and now it's happened. You've made this happen. You may rest now, friend. Sleep. Sleep. Thank him I will though, as Twin Caliber is the most 2002-ass game ever made, with a combat system designed to make players feel like they're in the hospital scene in Hard Boiled. If you're struggling to remember Twin Caliber, it might be because the game only launched in Europe and developers Rage Software actually failed to rage against the dying light soon after its release. Like all good video games though, Twin Caliber opens with a text scroll telling us about a mysterious young woman that's rocked up at a small American town. Cut to 1 month later and the entire town is now ruined, with zombie-like mutants running rampant. The last survivor in town, Sheriff Fortman, seeks help from the criminal Valdez, who inexplicably is topless the entire time. Weird cults and monsters are fine, but a protagonist doing his best impression of the average Wigan High Street visitor is a bit hard to get on board with. Put your nips away, friend. Like 2% of our audience is kids, 2%. The game itself plays out like a mixture of Time Crisis and a twin-stick shooter, creating a third-person on-rails game that's every bit as bonkers as it sounds. You're moving along a set path, but you can control both of your arms using both sticks, allowing you to mow down the hordes of monsters that are standing between you and liberating the town from their madness. As you progress through the game's 20+ levels, you'll unlock new weapons to switch from, giving you more firepower when the hordes and monsters grow stronger. Listen, I embellished that as best as I could, but Twin Caliber, you know, it's not the best game in the world. I've just described basic mechanics in every shooting game there, okay? The game does have some flaws, but grab a friend and you could have a proper laugh with this little banger. Alright, so look. We know that, Rogue Galaxy is the most hidden of gems, given that you can buy and play the game right now on PS4 and PS5, but we're including it here as recompense for commenter Stratovarius8547, who made his feelings very clear indeed. Poor Rogue Galaxy, snubbed on your best PlayStation 2 RPGs list and now forgotten on your PS2 Hidden Gems video. First of all, thanks for sticking through 2 whole videos of our waffle, which is a record of some kind, I can't even do that, but secondly of all, let's fix that. A level 5 fronted action RPG, Rogue Galaxy follows the adventures of one Jaster Rogue, an unassuming young farmer who ends up being whisked across space by a group of pirates who believe him to be a legendary warrior. Along the way, the party ends up becoming embroiled in a massive conflict, and the fate of everyone in the galaxy rests in the hands of Jaster. Sounds good, right? But the game's Treasure Planet-esque vibe, it actually makes sense now that Rogue Galaxy failed to meet Sony's sales expectations, because Space Pirates just doesn't sell for some reason, because people are awful. Space pirates. Pirates in space. Come on, people. While the story and characters play a bit more on the basic side, arguably appealing to a younger audience, it's the gameplay and RPG mechanics that'll keep players coming back for more. Rogue Galaxy utilised real-time hack-and-slash combat in a time when most RPGs were still utilising some kind of turn-based system or time-based mechanic like Final Fantasy XII's ATB system. Being able to let loose a bit more was a liberating feeling, but that's not all. Rogue Galaxy's RPG mechanics like the Revelation Flow, similar to the Sphere Grid or License Board in Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy XII respectively, gives players access to new moves. Level 5 also brought back weapon synthesis from Dark Cloud in order for players to really hit their stride power-wise. Again, Rogue Galaxy is available right now on the PlayStation Store, so if you feel like giving it a try, it's pretty easily accessible. You know, if you have a PS4 or PS5 anyway. The same can't be said about this next game though. My hidden gem is Grandia 3, Sang stated in our comments, like that picture of the one guy stood up in the courtroom. A game that managed to be left out of a HD collection for the Grandia series, Grandia 3 is a decent game, but for die-hard fans it's not the same as the originals. Still though, games in legacy franchises that weren't quite as loved as the rest of the series make for excellent hidden gem material, and Grandia 3 meets that criteria effortlessly. Set in a fantasy world where humans can control plane-like vehicles via the power of magic, you play as a young chap by the name of Yuki. One day he and his mother rescue a young girl called Alfina who's being accosted by some shady men, who's then revealed to be a communicator, who's someone who can chat to the planet's guardians basically. Because Yuki is immediately love-struck like a dog, his mother agrees for the two to escort her in her communicator duties, with the growing party uncovering a plot to revive an evil guardian in the process. Before the next time you do something charitable, like taking your old trousers to Oxfam or something, just think to yourself, will this possibly end up in me fighting Sephiroth? But how does Grandia 3 play? Well, most critics would end up agreeing that the gameplay is the real highlight of the overall package, while the story was considered too linear for most fans and RPG lovers. Looking back now though, a shorter length RPG with less exploration doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world, as someone who's been playing Shin Megami Tensei 5 for literally months, and it won't end. In this day and age, a game like Grandia 3 would make for a great palate cleanser between games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Now who we got to battle to get this ported somewhere, please? Battle Engine Aquila first made its debut on PS2 in 2003, making very few waves in the process. Fortunately for any big Battle Engine heads out there, or whatever you fans refer to yourselves as, Aquilaholics maybe? Briars was on hand to remind people of its existence. Battle Engine Aquila, not a lot of people talk about this. Time to rectify that, my friend. Another entry into the genre of put the player inside a cool vehicle and let them lay waste to everything. Battle Engine Aquila follows Hawk Winter, who is a dock worker despite having the coolest name in existence ever. Clearly, nominative determinism kicked in a bit late for the guy though, as Hawk Winter ends up becoming the pilot of the experimental battle engine. Just in time as well, because war has begun to erupt. War never bubbles, it just tends to just shoot out, doesn't it? Reviews at the time were decent, if not groundbreaking, but for whatever reason, the game just flopped in terms of public attention and sales, despite the fact you control one of the coolest vehicles in gaming. Players can pick from 4 different types of battle engines, each with their own weapons and abilities, but each engine shares the capability of swapping between jet mode and walker mode. As for the levels themselves, you're given quite a bit of freedom in how you want to approach battles, which targets you want to take down, and in some cases, which orders you want to follow. In the grand pantheon of mech games, it's not exactly Armored Core 6, but what is? Despite that though, Battle Engine Aquila is still an interesting and fun experience you should check out, especially as it is actually on Steam right now. Go on, give it a look. You only live once, eh? That's not the best one, is it? Most people associate Bungie with either Halo or Destiny, but their earlier work tends to be forgotten. Bungie are bringing back Marathon, but one game has seemingly been forgotten by all except Bawana Fox 251. Oni has gameplay like Fighting Force, and I don't know why no one talks about this game, kinda forgotten. It's funny that we have both Oni and Ghost in the Shell standalone complex on the same list, as Oni was quite heavily and obviously inspired by the Ghost in the Shell film. Git's Sack, which is a great short name, would then feature a similar mix of gunplay and melee combat that Oni did, so it's just funny how things go around in the gaming industry. Anyway, Bungie's Ghoul in the Clam, Oni, sees players controlling Kanoko, who is an agent of a totalitarian government lying to the public about the dangers of this post-apocalyptic cyberpunk world. The levels themselves in that cyberpunk world are pretty open-ended, with players able to unleash an array of combos and melee-focused moves to take down opponents. There's guns too, but you can only carry one weapon at a time, and ammo is pretty scarce, so for the most part you'll be letting your fists and feet do the talking. While the story and minimalist graphics were criticised by reviewers at the time, the gameplay, animation and range of moves have ensured that Oni has become fondly remembered by some fans, and that's me as well. I remember I must have traded this in to my local game shop like 2 or 3 times, I just kept getting it back. Rest in peace CB Games, you were a real one. Anyway, fun fact, this game was published by Rockstar, owned by Take-Two, who were planning to also publish Halo before Microsoft swooped in, meaning we came relatively close to having Halo on PS2. Check out more on that in our PS2 facts video, but not before one final trip. People love open world racing games. I mean, look at the likes of Need for Speed Underground 2, Burnout Paradise and the Forza Horizon series. Being able to hit the open road in a range of vehicles without having to deal with the real world consequences of causing a 20-car pileup is brilliant wish fulfillment. But one game beat all of those to the punch, and Brett7799 wants us to talk about it. Road Trip Adventure was the greatest hidden gem. Part of the Choro Q series of racing games, Road Trip Adventure has been considered by many to be the best in the series thanks to its tight gameplay, the introduction of the open world to explore, and range of content on offer for players. The story, because yes, this racing game also predates Need for Speed's weird FMV cutscene stuff, sees the president of, the whole world, I guess, decide that he's had enough of being the big man in charge and wants to leave it all to whoever can win the World Grand Prix, which is a series of 7 races open only to the most elite drivers. Naturally, top-level drivers flock to the area like suspicious circumstances flock to Boeing. Little side note, you're also given the ability to choose the name of the game's currency, which of course should always be poop. Once the introductory cutscenes are over, you're pretty much free to explore the world at your leisure, completing races and recruiting fellow drivers, finding collectibles off the beaten path, or just competing in one of several minigames like football, golf, ski jumping, and others. Along the way, you're earning stamps that track how much of the game you completed, and with 100 stamps to collect, there's a lot to complete. While Road Trip Adventure did get a re-release, it was only in Europe and it was on the PS3 store specifically, meaning that specific port is now, slowly being lost to time. How about you do a little road trip to certain websites online where you can find information on how to procure it through unofficial channels, if you catch my drift. Matey.
Out the trash.
The Dead to Rights franchise actually ended up spawning quite a few sequels over its 8-year run, culminating in a 4th game, Retribution, on the PS3 in 2010. Yet despite managing to churn out quite a number of installments over its history, Namco Home Tech's third-person cop actioner never really found the mainstream audience it deserved, drawing influence from the noir cop genre as a whole, not to mention 2001's excellent Max Payne. Dead to Rights followed Officer Jack Slate tracking down his father's killer, a generic story of cop revenge that nevertheless fits with the cliches of the genre as a whole. Dead to Rights was never revolutionary in terms of its narrative or how it told it, but it did have some immensely enjoyable shooting mechanics similar to those found in later games like Path of Neo or Total Overdose. The influence of Max Payne was clear for all to see, but Dead to Rights had enough separate identity to justify its own existence, with the inclusion of both the beat-em-up combat sections and the use of Shadow, Jack's personal attack dog and one of gaming's goodest boys. Unless he was ripping your throat out, obviously.
It was good, don't let back. Put some more dumbass in. Had enough money?
Trying to sell a video game that's related / sponsored by a clothing brand is a difficult task, especially one published by Atari in the 2000s, which is why Mark Echo's Getting Up Contents Under Pressure likely didn't get the love it deserved when it first launched on the PS2 in 2006. From the title alone, which is the catchiest video game name of all time, right behind Cadence of Hyrule, Crypto the Necrodancer featuring The Legend of Zelda, you're given absolutely no indication to what the game actually is, what it's about, and what the gameplay is like. How are we getting up? Have we signed this off with HR? Who's under pressure? What's a Mark Echo? In reality, Mark Echo's Getting Up is like 3 games in one, offering platforming and competent beat-em-up action as its main features, but the real highlight is a love and admiration shown to the graffiti community. Set in an authoritarian city cracking down on all forms of public disobedience, graffiti included, you'll essentially start a paint and flyer-based revolution. Of course, if that doesn't work, you'll be able to grab a bit of plywood and smack some jackboots across the face. Please don't be put off by the cover art for Namco USA's early 2000s third-person shooter. There's a lot more to Killswitch than its superficial appearance would suggest. Killswitch wasn't exactly treading new ground with its rather convoluted story of a super soldier being remotely controlled by neural connection, but the game was revolutionary in terms of actual mechanics. In particular, Killswitch introduced the world to the idea of a cover system, named by Namco as the Offensive Cover System, an innovation that didn't cause much of a stir at the time, or when Operation Winback did an even more basic version of it years prior, but would later be taken on and popularized by the mighty Gears of War franchise just a few years later. Are you looking forward to E-Day? That's right, Eggs Day. When we get all our eggs out for a good shine, let us know in the comments. Whereas Gears went on to become one of Microsoft and Xbox's flagship properties, Killswitch didn't enjoy the same acclaim, instead destined for relative obscurity without a sequel or a spin-off to speak of. Sometimes the legacy doesn't go to the games that innovate, but instead those who pick up on an idea and then run with it. Some people might consider the Guitar Hero series to be the ascension of the rhythm action genre in popular culture, but that is only because Guitar Man didn't take off in a way that it should have as God intended. Sure, the game is probably a bit too conceptually weird to really earn a mainstream following, but those who are willing to have a go at this overlooked PS2 classic found a game that defied all expectations and conventions to create something utterly brilliant. Playing out like a Super Sentai anime but with a guitar and some cool solos, players control U1, a shy and nervous high school boy who's often the recipient of bullying. One day after being attacked, his dog transforms, handing U1 a weapon called the Last Gitaru, which then lets U1 transform into the titular Gitaru Man. Following along at home, with a sick guitar weapon in hand, Gitaru Man then throws 10 excellent songs at you, each more difficult than the last. It's a short experience, but the mark makes it indelible. Considering that Jet Li was one of the biggest action movie stars of the late 90s going into the 2000s, it's not surprising that he managed to headline his own video game. Jet Li Rise to Honor was the end result, with Li starring as Kit Yun, an undercover detective in Hong Kong assigned to be the bodyguard of Boss Chiang. Boss makes the decision to leave the underworld behind, which a bunch of crooks and goons have widely considered to be a stinky move. Long story short, Boss Chiang ends up assassinated by a mysterious sniper, and Jet Li is flown off to San Francisco in pursuit of Boss Chiang's estranged daughter Michelle. The premise uses a lot of the same tropes that most of Jet Li's Western-made action films did, so it helps that Jet Li's choreographer Corey Yuen was brought in to help with Rise to Honor's action scenes and motion capture. The game even features a DVD-like scene selection menu, just to sell that cinematic feel. As for actual gameplay, Jet Li's Rise to Honor used a unique system where the right analog stick is used to direct blows at the enemy, whether it's in hand-to-hand combat or the game's various run-and-gun sections. Rise to Honor's uncomplicated premise and full-throttle approach to gameplay meant that it was never going to win huge awards. But it definitely deserves to be remembered more than it is. If you want more 2000s as hell action, then check out Stranglehold, which came out on the following generation.
Hi, Jimmy here, just to butt in. I've just found out that you can also play as a roast duck in this game. Once you beat it, then you can use cheats to play as a roast duck. Is it too late for Game of the Year? Anyway, I'll give you back to Will now.
The racing game genre on PS2 was stacked, as it was hard to find any room between Burnout 3 Takedown and the Gran Turismo series. Some tried to find their racing game niche in other ways, especially focusing on extreme sports specifically. But even in that genre, developers were running up against the likes of the SSX series. It's no surprise then that Downhill Domination, the BMX racing game, struggled to gain much of a foothold on PS2, but it absolutely deserves a lot more love. With a title infinitely easier to understand than whatever nonsense Mark Echo was going for, Downhill Domination is all about being the best at going really fast down a mountain. Like SSX before it, there are multiple characters to choose from, each with their own personalities. And you can upgrade various aspects of your bike as you progress through the various championships. It's not a complex game by any means, but Downhill Domination's excellent tracks and arcadey physics means it's always exciting. The original Headhunter garnered its fair share of acclaim at the time of its release, still remembered by some corners of the gaming community for being a reverential evocation of all that was good about 80s action cinema. It also had one of gaming's earliest fully orchestral scores, courtesy of Richard Jacques, and boasted the first ever video game soundtrack to be recorded at Abbey Road Studios. Headhunter Redemption didn't end up with quite the same legacy, instead falling through the cracks to become one of the most underrated PS2 games of all time. Redemption is set 20 years after the events of the first game and sees the original protagonist Jack teaming up with a new partner named Lisa X. It's the future, I guess, who unravel a conspiracy when attempting to prevent a group of arms smugglers. Poor old Headhunter Redemption had been so buried that it's the sort of sequel that most don't even know exists. And it certainly didn't help that the game's creator, Swedish devs Amuse, went bust not long after Redemption hit the market. If you do manage to snag a copy, you'll probably be sitting on a rare piece of valuable gaming history in 50 years' time. Maybe. Of all the sadly forgotten PS2 games unearthed for this list, there surely can't be many that typified that specific generation of gaming more than SCE Cambridge's ambitious but flawed ghoul-nabbing simulator Ghost Hunter. You can't help but feel sad that a mid-tier oddity like Ghost Hunter simply won't get published by the Sony of today. The 2004 release follows Lazarus Jones, a man whose name makes him sound like a 50s soul singer but is actually a Detroit cop tasked with rescuing his partner from a ghost realm after he's been ghost-napped by ghouls. That old chestnut. Ghost Hunter is such a weird game that it's hard to look back on it and believe it really existed. But beneath the odd setup and some understandably dated visuals that were nevertheless absolutely exceptional at the time, it was one of many releases on the PS2 that could claim to have a heart. Quite fittingly, it truly felt as it had a genuine soul. You can play this on your PS5 right now, and you really, really should. The PS2 was definitely no stranger to a range of bombastic shooters, but one that often gets overlooked when it comes to celebrating the best is Urban Chaos Riot Response. Developed by a pre-Arkham Asylum Rocksteady Studios, Urban Chaos' story, premise and cutscenes, all told through newscasts, feels like we've entered a world where everything Fox News says and wants has come true. But when it comes to the gunplay, Urban Chaos truly shines. The game gives players a wide selection of weapons ranging from pistols to assault rifles to shotguns, and a variety of melee or thrown weapons, along with a stun gun when you're looking to arrest some perps instead of blowing their heads off. You're also rewarded with stronger weapons and tools for doing so. However, Urban Chaos's real highlight is the ballistic shield, giving you a much needed defense option during heavy firefights. Close the distance, bash them with your shield, win. It never gets old. From one Urban to another, we just need Carl Urban to release a game next. Don't you wish you could go back to a simpler time in gaming, where all you had to do was load up a level, fight some goons, then perform some sick juggle combos on them? Urban Reign is a welcome reminder that sometimes games don't need to be complex and emotional treatises on the nature of violence. They just need to be incredibly fun when you hit the buttons. Even if there are 100 levels in the campaign and you'll probably get bored once you hit mission 74 or something, Urban Reign never stops being fun when you hit the buttons. A 3D beat-em-up that utilizes a system similar to Tekken, Urban Reign's beauty comes from how free-flowing the combos are despite only using a few basic inputs. However, those willing to sink time into learning the game will find a robust parry and counter system that really separates street-level thugs from badass bosses. There's even support for 4 players via multitap, which can become truly chaotic. Considering how influential the PS2 was in the world of couch multiplayer, Urban Reign doesn't get celebrated enough, except by us. We probably celebrate it a little too much. Sorry about that.
There have been dozens of Lord of the Rings games released over the years, so much so that it would be almost impossible to keep tracks on every game bearing the Tolkien brand seal of approval. And also those that should get stamps of shame. More than 20 years since Peter Jackson's definitive trilogy, Middle-earth lore has still proved a safe bet among a receptive audience, even when they tried to make Shelob into Shaglob. It was inevitable then that some Lord of the Rings games would receive more love than their counterparts. The licensed movie tie-ins, especially the exceptionally enjoyable Return of the King, chef's kiss, made as many memories for children of the 90s as the actual films themselves. Meanwhile, Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor took what made Assassin's Creed so great and made you enter blood feuds with orcs called Steve the Wartful. Lesser known and far less appreciated was the Third Age, EA's ambitious RPG that looked to exploit the success of the Final Fantasy franchise by taking its turn-based combat and transposing it into a Lord of the Rings game. Following a storyline that runs parallel to the main action of Jackson's epic trilogy, the Third Age's own protagonists often felt like own-brand versions of the iconic characters you saw on the big screen, kinda like what Marvel's Avengers did to the MCU. Nevertheless, once the game does get into its stride and a few fan favourites pop up to lend a hand, the Third Age blossoms into a hugely enjoyable RPG that still stands up today, but we would still love a remaster. Alright, listen, if this next game's not on your list, you're not coming in. Yeah, that's right, the world's #1 defenders of the Bouncer have logged on to declare that the game is underrated. Actually, is it the best game ever made for the PS2? No, far from it, but as perhaps the earliest example of a beat-em-up on the PS2, the Bouncer was a bold first step into what was the future of gaming, and no one's first step is ever perfect. Hey, just go watch some of our earliest videos. Actually, you know what? Don't do that. Don't do it, you're forbidden from doing that. I've decided, don't do it. Anyway, the Bouncer story encouraged multiple playthroughs with all 3 characters, as each revealed new details and backstory about the whole game. Elsewhere, the graphics are still considered among the PS2's very best, while the game sported perhaps the goofiest ragdoll physics ever seen in a game not called Human Fall Flat. One strong kick and characters would fly around a level like they just launched themselves at the wall in the Spain level in Tony Hawk's Underground 2. Again, we gotta stress that the Bouncer is massively flawed, and those save points will make you want to bounce your console right out of the fucking window sometimes, but it's still entertaining and certainly underrated if you can jive with it. We welcome you into the Bouncer Hive when you are ready. As for the next game, listen, Michael Cera has good taste. At a time when Guy Ritchie had made wise-cracking London gangsters affable anti-heroes and games like GTA were showing the potential of explorable open-world cityscapes, Team Soho's The Getaway came at just the right moment. A sort of flawed, messy mess of a game, The Getaway was actually one of the first to prove that the GTA format could really work outside of, you know, GTA. It also had a really cool health system. Do you remember getting shot and then your guy would be bleeding and then you could see it through his suit and then he'd have to lean against the cover to heal up his blood? That was pretty neat, I like that. The trick couldn't quite be repeated the second time around though, certainly not in terms of financial success. While the first game reportedly shifted around 4 million copies, the follow-up only managed half that figure, leading a proposed prequel to be trapped in development hell before it was finally canned for good. It's a shame considering that the game that killed the franchise was far more of an unappreciated work in progress than a stone cold dud. What Black Monday did have was a real sense of the cinematic, its desire to emulate the grand scale car chases and heists of the movie screen clearly evident in every tyre squeal and back alley shootout. There were times when the whole experience could feel a little barren when the towering backdrop of London's tower blocks and skyscrapers failed to really land, but when Black Monday clicked into place, it was one hell of a ride. Do you wish Housemarque made a Metro game? Well, this next one's got your name on it. Usually video game tie-ins are related to a property that lots of people have heard of. In the case of Beverly Hills Cop on PS2, it was like the developers had heard of the IP in some kind of cheese dream, which is why the Red Star was an interesting choice to receive a PS2 game. Based on an obscure but still beloved comic book series from the 2000s, the Red Star video game featured the same characters and world as the comics, told through a shoot-'em-up style of gameplay that featured lots of enemies, massive bosses, and plenty of fun. While the excellent gameplay alone in the Red Star would make it worthy of an underrated games list inclusion, it very nearly didn't come out at all. The Red Star was due for release in 2004. With even press reviews circulating at the time, but before launch, developer and publisher Acclaim went busto. XS Games would purchase the game's rights in 2005, but we still have to wait until 2007 to actually play the Red Star for ourselves. It's the story of the little game that could. Shame it couldn't come out a little earlier before the launch of the PS3 so people knew what it even was, but still. Don't let us get in the way of you playing this next underrated banger. 2002 was a massive year for video games. Ratchet & Clank, Splinter Cell, Vice City, Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, oh my god, what an absolute whipper, the list goes on and on. Little wonder then that Acquire's action-adventure epic Way of the Samurai ended up being somewhat buried under a slew of unrelenting excellence. Like so many underrated PS2 games, Way of the Samurai feels like an intimate affair that puts its energies predominantly into gameplay and story, finding its niche and executing it all effectively. In fact, the katana clanking combat is the best aspect of Acquire's samurai epic, allowing you to live out the ultimate fantasy of being a deadly ronin without the hassle of potentially losing a finger, limb, or head. And not the fun one. If you wanted Onimusha 2 to go more all in on its choices and relationships, this was the game for you. The most notable aspect of Way the Samurai was its innovative branching story mechanics, meaning the player's decisions at one point in the narrative would have drastic implications for how the story turned out in the end. Multiple endings and infinite player choice might be something we take for granted now, well, maybe in pretty much just Baldur's Gate 3, but not that many games were doing it way back in 2002, one of the last good years. Hey, 2003 was also a pretty good year because it saw the release of this next game. So we have to apologise in advance if us mentioning this little freakazoid leads to this crazy price increasing by even just a penny more. Guys, let's just chill out a bit. Unless it means my copy of Run Like Hell gets to be worth hundreds one day, in which case, let's get running like hell. While time has certainly been a lot more favourable to Gregory Horror Show over the years thanks to its rather blocky yet still timeless art style, there's still no denying that when Gregory Horror Show launched, it flopped. That's not really surprising considering it's an adaptation of a CGI anime that didn't even air outside of Japan, but those who did take a punt on this curio found a game unlike any other. A game that kind of really defies pigeonholing, Gregory Horror Show can only be described as a stealth survival horror blend, with players controlling a child who, while lost in the forest with no memories of their past, finds themselves at Gregory House. A hotel with no escape for the player, you must steal the lost souls held by the other residents in order to fulfill a pact with death and escape. It sounds grim, but there's a cutesy art style to it all, making the whole game absurd, unsettling, and unforgettable. Also, top tip, there are other ways of playing this game rather than paying 100 bones for it. We just can't show you. Wink wink wink, cough cough cough, wink wink wink. Let's just slink back into the shadows before we talk about another shadow game. No, not Shadow the Hedgehog. There haven't been many games that have felt quite as typical of the PS2 era than Capcom's Shadow of Rome. Somewhat riding on the back of the enduring popularity of Gladiator and the world's perpetual fascination with seeing burly men hack one another to bits in a large sandpit, Shadow of Rome follows the story of Agrippa, a Roman centurion condemned to that very fate when his father is accused of murdering Julius Caesar. I mean, to be fair, didn't a lot of people murder Julius Caesar at least a little bit back in the day? Shadow of Rome is a hell of a lot of chunky fun, a quality that perhaps more than any other the PlayStation 2 era offered in absolute heaps. With meaty, satisfying combat, endearingly clunky cutscenes and arcadey visuals that proudly proclaim your killer exploits, Juicy Tomato and Wrath of the Gods are two to look out for. Shadow of Rome practically revelled in the bloody reputation of gladiatorial combat. Sometimes the game does try to do a little too much, also including a couple of rather rudimentary stealth sections where you instead play as some underfed twink and some rather wonky chariot racing, but overall Capcom's vision more than shines through. Sadly, Shadow of Rome's poor sales meant that an intended sequel was ultimately repurposed as Dead Rising, giving the world one great franchise while depriving it of another. No, this is rad.
I'll give it a shot.
The PS2 era had no shortage of games where you control big robots or kaiju and have a massive scrap in the middle of a bustling city centre, though they unfortunately kept overlooking Wigan as a venue. It would look better afterwards, I'd say. Sure, most of them involved Godzilla, which kinda limits your options a little bit if you are also this arsehole, but there's still a few big robot games out there that have been massively overlooked over the years. One such game that boasts a gameplay mechanic that honestly should be considered for future games is RAD, Robot Alchemic Drive. Set on an Earth currently being invaded by aliens known as the Vulgara, you play as the person controlling the big robot fighting all these aliens. While you control the robot as you would normally, there's an added twist that makes RAD more strategic and interesting. You pilot the robot from the outside, like it's an RC car, and you need to be within a certain distance for it to work. That's pretty neat. It becomes a game of two halves, trying to beat up the alien with your robot while avoiding being crushed as a human. Kinda a little bit like that Anne Hathaway movie, but with a lot less Jason Sudeikis, thank Christ. That sounds like the one for us. Speaking of the one... From one kaiju to another. Like the Lord of the Rings, The Matrix ended up spawning multiple tie-ins across all forms of media. When it wasn't being parodied on late night sketch shows or finding itself given new life as a West End musical, probably, the Wachowskis' existential sci-fi hit was finding success in the exciting world of the movie to video game adaptation. 2003 had given the world the extremely buggy and rushed Enter the Matrix, but it was Path of Neo where the whole exercise really clicked into place. Path of Neo isn't a particularly revolutionary game, nor is it a complex or nuanced one. What the developers at Shiny Entertainment, who also made Wild 9 on the PS1, which you can check out in our earlier video, it's almost like we planned this and we aren't just a bunch of apes smashing the keyboard, understood however was that inhabiting the role of the One was the fantasy wish fulfillment we all craved. and that stepping into the black coat and trendy sunglasses of Keanu Reeves' kung fu kicking saviour was all anyone wanted back in the early 2000s. It's all most of us want in 2024, to be honest. That's exactly what Path of Neo gives you, the best action sequences of the movie trilogy repurposed so that you're in control with some absolutely silly extras chucked on top. This is fan service of the best kind, kicking armed guards in the head, dodging bullets in slow motion, and fighting giant ants? Okay. Thank God they didn't make us talk to the architect for 5 hours, mind you. Sick of us talking to you? Alright, let's wrap this up with a serious member berry for the final entry. Capcom set their stall out early in the PS2's lifespan regarding their goal to conquer the character action genre, which didn't even have that name back then and just kinda went by hack and slash. Devil May Cry and Onimusha still stand as some of the biggest classics on the platform, but another character action game of theirs, Chaos Legion, doesn't earn as much love as its publisher stablemates. What's that? Project number 3? Wait for the GameCube Hidden Gems video. If you want to see that, let us know down below. While it's true that Chaos Legion isn't quite as complex or intense as other Capcom action games, it's still well worth checking out. A gothic opera set in a world of religious zealots and demons, players control Sieg Warhite, a powerful warrior who's able to summon demonic help known as Chaos Legion, to beat up monsters. Searching for a former friend who seeks revenge on the whole-arse world, Sieg can issue commands to the Legion as they fight alongside him against hordes of enemies. If you've grown to love the Nintendo Switch exclusive Astral Chain from Platinum, which itself spun off from a bunch of talented devs who used to work underneath Capcom, Chaos Legion serves as an excellent precursor, which itself feels like an awesome time machine back to the glory days of the 6th generation.